Hello, welcome to the Will to DIY. This podcast is a place for me to sandbox ideas, play with them, tinker with them, build on them, or perhaps just throw them away and get back to work.
Hey, I know that we're in the middle of the COVID crisis, but I recorded this 2 months ago, and I'm just now getting around to tightening it up. And I know that there's going to end up being some sort of correlations or associations between what's going on now and what I'm talking about today. Uh, but really, what I was quite interested in is the DIY conversation around citizens and politics and how that sort of collapses together. And one of the corollaries I had come across previously was the Ukrainian protests of 2013, 2014. And I stumbled in this because during this revolution, the government's fighting against the citizens are fighting back. They end up having 1 million people at the city center in Kiev called the Maidon. And I just found it all to be sort of amazing, sort of shocking, right? They love their country, they're patriotic, but they're not sort of nationalists, right? They don't love their country for what it's doing just because of what it is. They love their country because of what it can be. Long story around here, I was reading a book by Timothy Snyder called The Road to Unfreedom. Reminds me a lot of Adam Curtis's hypernormalization as far as it points out a path of politics to disempower people. So how do you fight back against this? And for that matter, if you're holding a rebellion in your own country in the middle of winter, how do you get 1 million people together? Social media? Maybe, but can you see 1 million people doing anything together in America? Probably, but mostly it's sitting on your butt. Maybe you could crowdfund a protest, or you could send digital letters to your congressman or $20 to your favorite politician. What the Ukraine sort of put out, though, was this idea that on social media, part of their campaign was to say that your likes don't count. We don't care if you like our posts. Get your butt out here. Move your body here. And so 86% of these people were actually from outside the city of Kiev. They came in for the protest, and they stayed for months. How is this possible? It has to be the cause. Whatever the cause or the reason behind this, it has to be driving these things. And what were they reacting to? These people were reacting against a breach of law, a corrupt government, their president Yanukovych, apparently one of the most corrupt politicians of all time. Well, these people wanted their laws to be respected. They didn't want to get taken over by Russia and all these other kind of things. But they're basically fighting and protesting for the Ukrainian youths so that they can have an independent place to grow up that's outside of the clutches of all these other tyrannical governments. These people really love their country, but they don't have to love what it's doing. The sort of distinction between being patriotic and being nationalistic. Nationalistic thinking is that you blindly love your country despite its corruption and its atrocities and what it's doing. So instead, you try to be a patriot. And what really shows up is that the government, of course, when you protest against them, they show who they really are. They show their lack of care for their citizens by incurring violence against the masses. They go out there and start shooting people. And of course, in Ukraine, what becomes really fascinating is instead of running away from this, as the violence increased against the citizens' response increased. So they were defending what they thought was still a possible decent future for their own country. They put their bodies in the way of the brutality. And then you wonder also, on a different level, not just what you're doing physically for yourself, but how can this size of a group last for months? And of course, what really becomes fun to think about is that they did all of this without a government. They were internal organizing communities. So they formed a civil society, and what you might think of as a civil society is these are horizontal networks. There's no political affiliation. There's no basis for your friendship or relationships other than your temporary associations that are based on whatever your will is or whatever your skill is. You take this idea that freedom is a responsibility, and you say, we don't need your permission. We're not going to ask you for something. We're not afraid of you. We're going to do all of this on our own. We're going to do it ourselves, using our own will and our own skills. And they came up with this kind of interesting idea that, of course, if you were alone, you could get picked off. There could be negative things happen to you. There could be problems. But you could be a friend of the Maidon. And this meant you were sort of moving as a pixel. And pixels don't work very well on their own. They work together in groups. And once you get enough friends together, and your friend bumps into somebody else's friend, then you form a cluster, and that cluster actually has communicative powers. And this kind of leads me back to this idea of a DIY community. DIY communities are often an online group of people that's self-organized, and they often are gifting their knowledge, their will, and their skill go into these gifts that save time and labor. You're growing a community through helping and empowerment. It's a gateway to a type of rebellion, really, because you're telling people not to be great consumers. You're telling people to question things and think about things, see if they can do it by themselves. And this kind of independent spirit is really the kind of thing that I see sort of working in favor of the Ukrainians, right? Is that they're taking a reaction to their laws being broken and a political system corrupted, to seeing their children shot and abused. They take physical action with their bodies. They stand and they move. They're not just sitting on their butt choosing sides or commiserating online. They're echoing the idea that freedom is a responsibility, and you make the world you live in without asking for anything in return. We can do this ourselves. What is this idea that we're always turning to the state to give us something? We're always looking to somebody else to save us. There is this idea that you get out and you save yourself. If you're going to rob us or cheat us or overcharge us or break the contract upon which we agreed, then we will take matters into our own hands. So I think that what ends up happening for me is seeing DIY as this kind of very beginner steps pathway for independently minded people who undertake active projects to better themselves, and they're working to better their own situation. They're interested in how the world works and functioning on a very realistic level, but also having sort of a theoretical pushback against political motivations on things. It's key for me because it's not really about choosing sides, as there's no sort of defined side to choose. And this becomes the other kind of side of this. There's no need to declare a schism or a side just because a country is multifaceted. I think that becomes simplistic and narrow-sighted. Instead, what we are trying to do is set up a behavioral pattern towards responsibility, learning, and action. And what's even better about the Ukrainian revolution was one of their slogans came from an American, Benjamin Franklin. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.